So our job within this session is to talk all about the cardiovascular system. And I've somewhat scruffily already sort of highlighted the word cardio and vascular separately here, just because I want you to understand that when we talk about cardio considerations, we are talking specifically about the heart. And we might sometimes specifically talk about vascular stuff. And by vascular, we are referring to the blood specifically and the blood vessels. So I just wanted to make that clear to you in case you had any miscomprehension about, probably less so about cardio, but more to do with vascular. So I wanted to address that. So here's our heart, or here is a representation of a heart. I'm going to come back into we'll be coming back to certain features of this image a little bit later on the session. But the first point I want to make to you is that the heart exists in what we would refer to as the thoracic cavity. In other words, in your and my thorax, or our chest cavity, our chest space. And we can see here that it's just slightly to the left. Let me just change color to show that differently. It's just slightly to the left. There's my little L for left. And you might be saying to me, well, I'm looking at this image here and it seems to be on the right hand side of this person. But of course, that's from us looking at this mirror image of this person. If you are this person or this representation, then this of course is your left shoulder up here, and this heart is on the left side of your chest. So just be aware of that. But we'll be coming back to these images in a few moments' time. Where we're going to spend the majority of our session is looking at this particular image. And we've got here a slice of a heart. So we're seeing a profile of the heart. So imagine the heart is literally from top to bottom sliced in half with a big long knife. Not a very pleasant thought, but it's the one we're going to go with. And we're going to look at certain features of this. We're going to look at certain features of this. So the first point I'd like to make with you is just to remind you that on this side of the heart, we are talking about the right side. On this side of the heart, we are talking about the left side. And that's going to become important in a few moments' time, exactly as I addressed it earlier on. The heart has 4 chambers. Let me write that up here. In fact, let me get out of the way because we're going to use some space. The heart has 4 chambers to it. Chambers just mean like hollow spaces within them, and we have 4 separate ones, although they do connect, or at least they connect to each other in pairs. And the first ones I want to address with you is the one that's up here, this sort of pink structure, and another one up in this pink structure here. And of course, first of all, we can see that they're on the upper part of the heart. And when we talk about the upper chambers, we are talking about the atria. Or if we say the singular, an or one atrium. So this here is on the right hand side of the heart, look. So this is my right atrium. Here's on the left hand side, so this is my left atrium. So right atrium, left atrium. Let's first of all address what is the job of these atria, the 2 atria. Well, they're the upper chambers, fine, but they accept blood back into the heart. So when blood returns to the heart, and you can see it could be returning here and here, look, it filters in to, in this case, the right atrium. We also have blood returning to the heart here, and it filters in to the left atrium. I'll talk more about where that comes from in a few moments' time. My second point is to address with you the fact that we have lower chambers also, and the lower chambers are called the ventricles. The ventricles. Okay, and what have I got down here? I've got my right ventricle, this orange kind of colour here, and here I have my left ventricle. And you'll notice, first of all, probably one of the most obvious things, if I just sketch over it kind of in blue here, the muscle wall around the atria is very thin. Like you see a very thin kind of structure. But the muscle wall around the ventricles is thick and powerful. So the ventricles are what we refer to as the lower chambers. 1 ventricle, 2 ventricles. Now, the thing to sort of understand here is that the job of the ventricles is to eject. Let me actually write that in for you. Is to eject blood. So they eject blood from the heart. So if the job of the atria is to receive blood, then the job of the ventricles is to eject or send out that blood. So that's also really, really important for us to understand. Now, it's kind of tricky for us to see it here, but I want to give you an example. If blood travels into the right atrium here, we've got the cross section here, so it's kind of tricky to see. But this here, this little structure here, is a valve, and the blood then passes down through this valve, and I'm just going to do it in yellow, and starts to fill up in the right ventricle here. Now, if that right ventricle then contracts, imagine it contracting, let me just change colour, imagine it contracting inwards like this, then that blood is going to get forced up and out, and it gets forced up and out through here. This is effectively separated here. So here's our right atrium up here, and this blood gets forced up and out. And a point I'd like you to have an awareness of is we have some valves here, or we have a valve here, which is a really useful valve for you to have an awareness of. And this particular one over here is called the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve. And the tricuspid, let me just rewrite that. The tricuspid, not ud. The tricuspid valve separates the right ventricle from this big artery over here. And this big artery here is what we call the PA, or the pulmonary artery. So a couple of things about the pulmonary artery. First of all, it actually takes blood off and up, just doing a simple representation, to the lungs. So this blood is going to leave here, go to the lungs, and it's then going to travel back, and it's going to re-enter here and here, back into the left atrium. So as blood leaves our right ventricle, gets pushed up and out through the tricuspid valve, up through the pulmonary artery. Let me just write that in. Pulmonary artery. Pulmon, by the way, means lung. Pulmonary artery, and then it heads up to the lungs. And we should know already that the blood is being delivered to the lungs because it's going to be oxygenated at the lungs. It then comes back and is returned back into the heart here and here, here and here, via what we refer to as the pulmonary vein. Okay, so now we have oxygenated blood now collecting here, which we already know is the left atrium. Okay, that blood is then passed down into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle then goes through a contraction, by the way, at the same time as the right ventricle, and that contraction forces the blood up and out through, I don't know if you can see it here, this valve here. And this valve here is what we call the bicuspid valve. The bicuspid valve. So we had tricuspid on the right side, and now we have bicuspid on the left side. And where that leads to is actually through this major artery up here. Let me just change colour. This major artery up here, which we refer to as the aorta. Very elastic, very powerful, very strong. And you see there's various exit points off the aorta. This point where my pen is now, this is the aortic arch. But really what we find is, I'm just going to change back to red, is that this aorta then brings blood back behind the heart. I'm going to kind of represent it over here, back behind the heart, and then the blood then moves down to the body. So imagine it's being delivered, for example, to the working muscles to release its oxygen there. And then what we find is that the blood then returns eventually back up to the heart, and of course through this vein here, the blood is then going to return back into the right atrium, and this vein here is called the vena cava. And I'm looking at the inferior or lower one. There's also the superior vena cava up here as well. That's an E. Sorry, I should have written that better. Vena cava. So effectively, we have a double loop. One loop which takes the blood up to the lungs, and a second loop which takes the blood down to the rest of the body. And we have names for these. The green one I've got up here, this is called the pulmonary circuit. For obvious reasons, the pulmonary circuit. And this lower one is what we call the systemic circuit. The systemic circuit. You maybe think about it in the sense it takes blood to the rest of our system in this way. A couple of last points before I sort of leave that there. I also want you to be aware that we have, I'm going to kind of draw them in black here. We have these valves here and here. We have these valves that separate the atria from the atria from the ventricles, and those guys also have a name. They are what we refer to as semilunar valves. Valves, by the way, they just prevent flow in the opposite or backwards direction. So the semilunar valves prevent blood from going back into the atria when the ventricles contract. The only place the blood can go is up and out of the pulmonary artery on the right hand side and out of the aorta on the left hand side. My last point about this, and if we go up here, The job of the heart, of course, is to deliver oxygenated blood to the muscles and other organs that need to use that oxygenated blood. But the heart itself, don't forget, is also an organ that requires oxygenated blood. And we have some specialist arteries. Here's one here. Here's another. We have these specialist arteries that actually supply the heart itself with an oxygenated blood supply. And these are what we refer to as coronary arteries, and you might have heard of those in relation to certain health conditions. And we also have coronary veins. They're pictured in blue here, and of course the job of the coronary vein is to return the blood that's gone through the coronary arteries to the heart back, so it returns back to the right atrium again to repeat the cycle. So that's our structure of the cardiovascular system. We're going to be addressing a lot of these points in more detail as we go forward. I feel like I've made a right mess on that image, and I don't know whether I've been clear enough with you. Be aware we could do an entire course, an entire playlist on this. And I did forget something. How could I? This wall down the middle here, this wall down to this point here, is what we call septum, or the septum. Let me put the article in, the septum. And this sep, it means separation. Okay, so it separates the left from the right, the septum, so be aware of that as well. Thanks very much.